When you sit down to watch a Stanley Kubrick movie, you need to plan to be there a while. So to keep you sharp during a Stanley joint, you'd be wise to throw some coffee down your gullet. And luckily enough, we have a sponsor who offers just that. They are Sparkplug Coffee, the convenient, affordable choice that sells you something that's a lot better than takeout. You're brewing with the best when you're brewing with Sparkplug, because they've got premium quality beans, and they'll deliver them right to your door. Yep, have a Canadian or American address and you can get in on this. And Canadians, you know what? Free shipping. Free shipping. Here's a suggestion. Join their Autopilot Coffee Club. And don't feel like if you join, then you're stuck, because you can pause or even cancel anytime. So log on to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and give it a try. That HYES part represents our promo code. Using that code nabs you a one-time 20% discount. But before you check out Sparkplug's website and find your new favorite, you probably want to hear us jam about a Kubrick flick. Let's start doing just that. Bev?
And action! Have you ever seen
Barry Lyndon? Well, top of the morning, film fans, and thank you for being an audience member. An audience member! I'll stop that. For episode number 663 of this podcast that's all about classic movies. Have you ever seen spoils movies of yore by talking about every inch of them, well, most of the inches, every Monday and every other Friday. It's May now, and we finally don't have a theme month. We're just going to cover 6 or 7 movies for their own sake. And the we are Ryan Ellis and my wife Bev, your foppish hosts who have never and will never live like ladies and gentlemen, especially if what we see in this movie is living like ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Bev.
That's me.
I said top of the morning because Ryano'neal is playing an Irishman. I haven't seen this film in years. I assumed he was English. I assumed this whole movie was about English people. And if I'd been aware of his Irishness, I probably would have covered this on St. Patrick's Day. The Informer was a good choice. It won a lot of Oscars, Best Director, Best Actor, and so on. But I looked them up, but I don't remember seeing this on the list of Irish films that we hadn't already talked about on this podcast.
Well, most of it doesn't take place in Ireland, in fairness.
True, but he is an Irishman, so if it was there, I must have overlooked it. Although I'm glad I'm talking about it with you, because if I had done it then, it would have been a solo show, because it was a solo show when I did The Informer. All right, anyway, happy Cinco de Mayo. I was planning to have us cover a Mexican flick in this slot, but nothing really intrigued me all that much. We've covered some Mexican films already, too. It's not like we have no options, but they're in the past. So instead, we'll just pay tribute to those who enjoy this holiday right now. Have fun. Happy partying. Cinco de Mayo. All right, the coming attractions trivia for Barry Lyndon. Stanley Kubrick was nominated for 3 Oscars for a single film 4 different times. For Dr. Strangelove, for 2001, A Space Odyssey, for Clockwork Orange, and for Barry Lyndon. In the case of Barry Lyndon, he lost in all 3 categories to the same film, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The question is, did that ever happen to Kubrick again, where all of his Oscar losses were to the same movie?
Well, I should say it happened to him before.
Another time, I meant.
Another time, okay. In 72, he lost all 3 of those nominations to the same film, The French Connection, for Clockwork Orange.
And there's 71
films,
to the
French Connection, yeah.
The Oscars were 72, that's right. All 4 of the losses that year, in fact, were to French Connection because it also lost the editing, Bill Butler. Not the cinematographer, Bill Butler, but an editor named Bill Butler lost to French Connection as well. In the case of 2001, Stanley lost his writing nomination to Mel Brooks' script for The Producers, while Carol Reed beat him for Best Director. He wasn't a producer on, 2001 wasn't nominated for Best Picture, so it wasn't even a candidate. And of course, he won the award for the visual effects that year, so he won one of the 3 nominations. The effects, the writing, and the directing were his 3 nominations. And he lost picture and director to My Fair Lady in 1964, which was his Dr. Strangelove year, but Beckett won for its screenplay. So yes, one other time, and it was The French Connection. I don't think he ever went to the Oscars, even though he won that one time. I wonder if anyone ever asked him, somebody must have said, what do you think about the fact you lost over and over and so often to the same film? Not necessarily every time, every category, except twice that did happen, though, Cuckoo's Nest and French Connection.
He doesn't strike me as a guy who was chasing an Oscar, though.
Well, true. Probably didn't care. Maybe the Coens, who've won 4, would agree, and they're big fans of his. Maybe they felt the same way and were just lucky enough to win 4 times to his 1.
He has such a rare distinction of one of the very few directors working who could truly write his own ticket and get big budgets and take real risks.
And was the only producer on this and several other films, and the only writer. Well, he had co-writers a lot of times, but sometimes was the only writer on his films, and would get nominated in all 3 categories by himself, too. Okay, the Irish opportunist. Irishman. Barry Lyndon, Redmond Barry, was released by Stanley Kubrick's studio for a huge chunk of his career, Warner Brothers, on December 18th, 1975. That means just about 50 years have passed. And I think, and this isn't exactly breaking news, this film is better regarded now than it was then. In fact, a lot of people would put it number one in Stan the Man's filmography. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. Warner Brothers expected a Kubrick film to do very well for them, and yes, it did end up making nearly 3 times its budget, so you can't call it a flop, even if the studio thought they'd have more of a mega hit on their hands when they did sign this guy to make a movie for them. Well, they did Clockwork Orange with them, too. Anyway, Bab, the movie is nearly as old as me. Remind us what Barry Lyndon's about. Us creaky old men, by giving us the skinny on Barry Lyndon, please.
ryano'neal is Redmond Barry, a young Irishman in the mid-18th century. He must flee his home after, quote, killing an officer in a duel over a woman, and on the road he loses everything to bandits and is forced to join the British infantry to serve in the 7 Years' War. He deserts the army, but gets caught and forced to join the Prussian force, where he impresses his captain, who puts him to work as a spy, sent to keep an eye on the Chevalier de, I'm going to say this wrong, Ballyberry? Ballyberry? Yeah. An Irish expat, diplomat, and professional gambler. Barry immediately tells Ballyberry everything, and the two become an effective team, running crooked games and swindling the aristocrats of Europe. Barry meets and seduces Lady Lyndon, a beautiful, wealthy countess. Their marriage is unhappy. Barry is unfaithful, cruel to her son, and careless with her fortune, but he adores and dotes on their own son, who dies tragically after a fall from a horse. Lady Lyndon's son challenges Barry to a duel and shoots Barry in the leg, forcing an amputation. He's then exiled from his estate by his stepson, a wounded pariah. It's 3 hours long. It's going to be a long skinny.
Yeah, understandable. I love that he's Lord Bullingdon, even as a kid.
Even his mother speaks to him and refers to him as Lord Bullingdon. Apologize right this minute.
Not Jim or something. How you doing, Jimmy? That's not his name. Or, in a nutshell, none of this would have happened if Redmond just had the right to marry his cousin.
I think he had the right to marry his cousin, but his cousin didn't want to marry him.
If he had the money to marry his cousin.
Yes, that's it. That's it right there.
And for those who didn't get it, that's a Simpsons reference yet again. Okay, there are some impressive numbers on Barry Lyndon, but this first one is not, and that is the Rotten Tomatoes score from the critics. It's only 78%. 111 fresh reviews, 32 rotten. The average, though, is 8.2 out of 10, but 92% of audiences. This was number 5 on Siskel's top 10 lists, Gene Siskel, that is, in 1975 or whatever, 76, whatever. He probably put in a 76 list. No, I think he did put in the 75 list. They did that. He and Ebert, you look at their old lists, and a movie that was actually 74 but 75 because it came out at the end of the year and then didn't get watched by them maybe till January. Ebert liked it, but didn't put it on his list. Akira Kurosawa was a big fan. So is Scorsese, who says it's his favorite of all of Kubrick's films. Your favorite, really? And Lars von Trier is also a huge fan of the film. So very acclaimed directors there. Kubrick's number 1 on Rotten Tomatoes, by the way, is Dr. Strangelove. Then it goes in this order: Paths of Glory, The Killing, Spartacus, Lolita, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Full Metal Jacket, Bev can't believe this, A Clockwork Orange,
I'm aghast,
The Shining.
Okay, fine.
These aren't bad scores necessarily, but in descending order. So The Shining, Killer's Kiss, this, Eyes Wide Shut, and Fear and Desire. His very first film was last.
Although they all have probably pretty strong scores.
The last few aren't as good.
Yeah.
78 for this isn't that great, but most are in the 80s or 90s and so on. The Numbers, the box office site about box office, says it was 17th at box office site about box office. 17th at the 1975 box office. Jaws was number 1. Cuckoo's Nest was number 2, so the Best Picture winner. And Dog Day Afternoon, one of the other candidates in that category, was number 4. This is 185th on IMDb's Top 250, right there with Mad Max Fury Road, which we just covered a few weeks ago, Ben-Hur, and 12 Years a Slave. We've covered all those, and I love the diversity of those 4 films. I guess they're all big, in some ways, epic-type action films, but so different otherwise.
That basically means that the IMDb 250 must have almost all of Kubrick's films on it.
I didn't look, but I think it does.
If this is on it and it's near the bottom of the list.
They're mostly on there, for sure, yeah.
Wow.
IMDb, yeah. And appropriate for a movie about a gold digger, this movie won 4 Oscars. For John Alcott's cinematography, Leonard Rosenman's music score, the art direction, set decoration by Ken Adam, Roy Walker, and Vernon Dixon, and the costumes by Ulla Brett Soderlund and Milena Canyonero. Whoa. Canyonero.
Simpsons are getting a lot of play already.
I'm not sure if Canyonero is how you say her name, but I'm saying it that way. Maybe it's Canyonero. And the 3 nominations that didn't win were for Kubrick: the writing, the directing, and the producing. And the last plaudit here is the Sight and Sound list. It was on a lot of them. It was 28th in 2002. It was tied for 59th in 2012 and tied for 45th in 2022. And by then, they also had the director's poll, and it was 12th.
Wow.
12th on the director's poll. So, you've seen it before, right? What'd you think of it?
No, this is my first time seeing it.
Okay, I never can keep that straight. What you've seen, what you haven't seen before. Most movies we covered, I've seen at least once before. But for me, it's been so long. Most of it felt fresh and new. What'd you think?
I'm obsessed.
Really?
I can't believe it took me this long to see this. Though, I'm not sure I would go back in time and ask 20-year-old me to appreciate this film. It's a pretty grown-up movie. But as a 47-year-old watching this for the first time, it blew me away. Also want to acknowledge that I feel a little underqualified to talk about it because I've seen it just once. And it's definitely a film that deserves to be rewatched. It deserves real attention. It deserves to be seen on a big screen. And if I ever see that it's playing at one of our rep theaters, I really want to see it that way.
As far as you not being qualified or me not being qualified, I don't care.
No, I don't. I mean, I'm still here.
It's our podcast.
Mm-hmm. I think I just said it
more
to be like, this is a movie that really deserves to be studied. And I think it would be a fun movie to watch over and over again and pick apart. Now, when you talk about those Rotten Tomato scores, I'm not even mad at people that just can't feel it because it's also a movie that's very much not for everybody. But this is such a Bev film. I love a slow burn. I love a good piece of nihilism. Some dark stuff happens in this movie.
That's Kubrick for you.
Yeah, that's Kubrick. This is not for everybody, but it really works for me.
When did it feel like it was your movie?
Immediately I was in, but it wouldn't be the first movie that let me down, disappointed me. I was not really expecting to love it because everything I've heard about the movie all over the years was that it's boring.
And
right?
slow.
It's slow, it's long, it goes on. It's a boring movie, nothing happens. Lots happens. But it is a very deliberately slow-paced movie. I had been warned against it. It's the reason why, after all these years, it was the only Kubrick film I'd never seen. I've never seen, I think it's Fear and Desire.
First one,
yeah, the one that he doesn't really take credit for anyway. But I'm glad that we corrected this error.
So the most famous thing about this movie is the style, I think more than even the story, and that is the cinematography, and that's the sets, and that's the costumes. John Alcott won the cinematography Oscar. Knowing Kubrick, he probably did an awful lot of lighting himself, but didn't get credit for it. I'm assuming you're saying the look was incredible. We saw this on, what was it again? We started it on one thing, on TCM. And I thought the print was just okay. I thought it was a little soft. So then we switched to Stars. It was marginally better, maybe. We probably should have seen the Blu-ray, what have you, but we saw TV versions of this effectively.
This is why I say I would love to see it if it ever plays at one of our rep theaters.
But even so, it did look good.
It looks incredible. It sure doesn't look 50 years old. It looks incredibly modern. And it must have been very influential. The natural lighting look is almost de facto now. It's an incredibly trendy way to shoot. Although a lot of movies and TV shows that shoot with that natural lighting don't look nearly as good as this.
Well, they are more rushed than he ever was.
Yeah, and obviously there's tons of great little featurettes or documentaries you can watch about the technicalities of how they got the look and how they got lenses from NASA, which is everybody's theory of why he shot the moon landing and then had this relationship with NASA. But he needed these lenses that let in a ton of light so that he could get those scenes that were actually lit by candles. Now you can see watching the scenes, there's a lot of candles. They're everywhere. And there's candles that are hidden on the set.
And they're souped up, too.
There's candles behind the actors, places there would never normally be candles. There has to be flex fills, too. You know that they're doing something to bounce that light around and do the best that they can with it. They should have given the focus puller an Oscar for what he pulled off, of how specific and finicky they had to be to keep the focus because the depth of field was like a centimeter.
The actors couldn't really move.
Well, they could move. They had still maintained this natural
Well,
way
certain
in the
scenes they couldn't move.
Yeah. They had to move exactly the same way every time they performed it, and the focus puller had to be completely ready. They had these elaborate grids. Of course, it's Kubrick, so I'm sure he shot dozens of takes of every single scene.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. But the technical mastery, those scenes are so beautiful. Those tableaus, which were made to resemble the artwork at the time. He particularly was inspired by William Hogarth paintings. Mm-hmm. Who was roughly a contemporary of Barry Lyndon. One of his most famous works was this series of paintings called Marriage à la Mode. That was this satirical portrait of a marriage for money. Some of the most famous shots from the movie of these kind of still life portraits of the characters in their time and place. The most famous one probably being near the end when Lord Bullingdon is approaching Redmond to challenge him to the duel, and he's just looking pathetic, depressed, grieving his son.
Shrinking. Yeah, he's just sitting in a place where they're playing cards, I think, behind him or wherever they're goofing around, other people are. And he's sitting facing the window, staring off. Lord Bullingdon challenges him, and I think he acknowledges it barely. Okay, fine. But then look what happens in the duel. Bullingdon's gun goes off because he's just... maybe it's a bit of a pun or a play on the fact that this virtual kid shot his load off too fast. He didn't actually point the gun yet, shot it into the ground. Or shot it off when maybe in the air. In any case, that was his shot. That counts. So his stepfather, who may not hate him that much, although he beat him earlier in the movie, but I guess he feels like, fine, if you want your justice, he just shoots his gun deliberately in the ground, even though he could have turned it and fired at the kid and killed him, or at least maimed him.
And we see several times in the film, so he has these duels. He's a good shot. He's a good fighter. The one thing that he does well that gets him through in life is that whenever he's challenged to physical violence, he usually wins, succeeds.
Yeah, he wins that boxing match against the guy who played...
Who's like twice as soft.
The big dude in Raiders that Indy fights by the plane. That gets chopped up by the propeller. That actor, Pat Roach, was in all 3 of the original Indiana Jones movies as one of the villains.
He's so good at these sword duels. That's how they get these aristocrats to pay their debts, even though they're cheating them and they challenge to a duel. He's pretty confident. He's pretty cool. So when Lord Bullingdon challenges him, he probably understands. Maybe the reason it took him so long to finally challenge him is because he knew he probably wasn't a better shot than him. And when he blows off that bullet... what is the next thing he does? He vomits in a hayloft because he thinks he's dead. He's really young, too. You're with Redmond the whole movie. And even though he's despicable, the movie never allows you to just hate him. An elegant, simple, and more predictable story would start with somebody who's a little naive, who gets corrupted by all the bad things that happen to him and becomes a bad person. You know, the Godfather story. He would be like the Michael Corleone, and by the end, he would be corrupted. That would be the tragedy. But instead, it just doesn't allow it to be that simple. You know, we were talking about the style. The word I would use to describe the style of this film is verisimilitude, which is not a hallmark of Kubrick at all. But in this movie, he was very determined to make everything look really lived in and realistic. I think it's what elevates this movie into something special, especially for 1976. It's incredible. It's incredible looking at, like, 75, sorry. It's incredible to see Ryan O'Neal looking so young. And to think, where is this movie taking place? I can't believe how old it is.
I don't know if he totally is believable as a person from, 1750s, so over 200 years earlier. Some people don't translate very well to the past. I'm not sure he does.
He's got the good skin and the
he was a big
good
star, and the studio said, if you're going to make this kind of movie with nobody else who's a star, and a long movie like you probably are going to end up making, they probably didn't know it'd be 3 hours plus, but if you're going to do that, you got to cast somebody from this list of star actors. And then he saw the list, Kubrick did, and it came down to apparently Redford and O'Neal. And I guess Redford either turned them down or what have you. But O'Neal was chosen because, well, I got to have a guy who's a big box office draw, so he's that guy. I think he works well enough. This is a better movie, better performance, I should say, than what he did in Love Story. Not that Love Story is a bad performance. We thought he was, we thought of the two of them, he was the better actor for sure.
Well, yeah.
Between him and Ally McGraw.
Bar, yeah.
So he's well cast, I guess, except I don't know if he entirely is believable in that time and place. But then maybe that is partly what Kubrick, in having to settle for this guy rather than maybe anybody could have possibly cast, maybe that also makes some sense because Kubrick did like things to not always work exactly. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he doesn't mind. If
Nicholson in The Shining is not at all what's in the book. I like what's in the book probably more for that character, but I still love Nicholson in The Shining,
and there's
too.
People to this day who think casting Shelley Duvall was a huge mistake.
Right.
Like, she's just such an
also
oddball.
Not the right casting. Is Cruise, or even, well, Kidman's pretty great in Eyes Wide Shut, but is Cruise the right casting for Eyes Wide Shut? Maybe not. But he loved to go against what people would have thought, go against the grain.
I love Ryan O'Neal's performance.
I think he's fine. I think he's also been directed to be distant, and that's the point. Now, I want to get back to something you said a minute ago about verisimilitude and the great shots. And yeah, that shot of him sitting there when he's drunk. But the outside shots, even though you always have to give credit to Mother Nature when you have a great outside shot as much as anything, but he and Alcott made the outside shots look so incredible too. I think it's the opening scene, after the opening titles, his father's killed in a duel. People online say, here's one of the greatest shots in the history of cinema. Well, so much of that's just Mother Nature giving you what you have for your look. But then you got to time it right when you shoot it, I guess. Find the right lighting. You're not going to just shoot at any old time of day and any old lighting, I guess. But some of the wide shots as well. And, of course, Kubrick did the zooms and everything, either forward or backwards. They shot in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Germany. But it reminded me the verisimilitude and the gray area performance of the main character, the secondary character in The Revenant, which I just covered, 2 weeks ago. The Revenant with Tom Hardy. I said in that podcast, yeah, he's the villain. He kills the main guy's son. But a lot of his character is also shades of gray. And this guy's a killer. He does some terrible things. He beats on his stepson, but he's very much a shades of gray main character. That movie also was shot a lot of the time with natural lighting.
Yes.
So The Revenant had to be inspired by Barry Lyndon.
Another thing about using zoom lenses, which...
Very few directors have ever done that.
Very unusual choice. Wes Anderson loves to use zoom lenses.
Altman did.
But Wes Anderson always wants to remind you you're watching a movie. He loves the audience to kind of be in on the joke. When I see the use of zoom lenses in a Kubrick film, particularly this, where everything else is made to look so lived in, because the other thing he does a lot is he uses a lot of handheld camera. You either have these really stiff, formal shots with the zoom lens, or you have him down on the ground in the fight, scrapping with the guys, or in the battle. When I see a zoom lens, one of the things I think of is documentary filmmaking. Another way to trick the audience into thinking you're watching a newsreel. But it's still so beautiful. Those zoom out shots, no matter where you stop the zoom, it's a perfectly framed shot with perfectly balanced action in the frame. It's so thoughtful and intricate, of course. It feels like a movie where it was really happening and somehow they travel back in time and happened to be able to put cameras in these rooms with these people as this was taking place.
Well, also, I think the unextraordinariness of these people.
Yes.
So often we see a historical movie, and yeah, if it's going to be about Napoleon, you don't have to like him to acknowledge he was extraordinary, or Alexander the Great, or Genghis Khan, or whoever. But I don't think that Redmond Barry / Barry Lyndon, or the people he interacts with, are the people you'd really think of as some of the greatest people ever, even though this is set during the 107 Years' War, I should say. And it was also made, by the way, so in the 70s during the Troubles in Ireland.
Yeah,
and that shut down shooting for a while. So they had their own verisimilitude of going through issues with all the war going on in Ireland while making the movie about war.
You mentioned Napoleon. He was trying to make a movie about Napoleon, and then another movie about Napoleon bombed, so the studio backed out. And part of the reason that he chose this as his next project is because he had already done so much research about the war and the costumes and the locations and everything. This is based on a book that was published at the time by
William Makepeace Thackeray,
a popular book at the time. I guess he had read it and he liked it, and he decided to just parlay all that work into this film instead.
Yeah, it was an 1844 novel, The Memoirs of Barry Lyndon, Esquire, by William Makepeace Thackeray, who was the Vanity Fair guy. I think he thought about doing that first, but he felt like that was too huge a project to do for a movie, which arguably this is too. It is over 3 hours long, and you could have made this into a miniseries, which I guess they didn't really do so much back then, or a TV series. But then you wanted a Kubrick film, and he didn't work in television, so you're going to have a movie if he wants to make a movie out of it. Obviously, after the run he'd been on, even though he didn't make a lot of movies ever in his career, he had those huge gaps, but Strangelove 2001 and Clockwork Orange were back to back to back, 7 years apart, granted, in those cases. But whatever he wants to make, within reason, you're going to do it if you can. So that's probably why they signed on. Then the movie wasn't as big a hit as they would have wanted. I don't know how the studio felt when they saw the film being made, but the thing I do like the best, and they probably would have liked this a lot too, because O'Neal's fine. It's not like he's bad. It's better, like I said, in some other performances he gave. But it's the supporting cast. These English actors, or maybe some of them are Irish, I don't know. But these European actors in the supporting roles are almost always pretty great. And they're not really over the top. Not that O'Neill is either. And yet, funny thing is that you see over the topness in Full Metal Jacket. And you saw it, The Shining, certainly. The Shining in a fun way in Dr. Strangelove. They underplay in 2001. Of course, even though McDowell's awesome in Clockwork Orange, he's big and over the top too. But O'Neill's not. The supporting cast gets to be more broad than he does. But they're maybe the strength of the whole movie when it comes to the performances. Because even though she is beautiful and she does a good job with what is in the story, Marissa Berenson, as Lady Lyndon, barely speaks. There's no there. Maybe that's the point. She's also the very last thing we see in the film, signing the annuity check to him, 500 guineas a year to get out of my life. And she doesn't really have any kind of expression. I think the idea is, Stanley probably said to her, don't really give away what you're thinking here, because she should be thinking, you're my husband and you screwed this family over. You could have killed my son and you humiliated him a long time ago. Shouldn't she be mad at him? But we don't really know what she's thinking. She's depressed when we meet her in the beginning of the film. She's a sad when she's married to the old guy. And then she marries him. I think she thinks for a moment she's going to be happy. They do have a passionate love affair for a little while. But immediately he turns on her as soon as they're married.
cruelly and unnecessary. You have this beautiful, wealthy woman. You could just be happy. You could just be kind to her son. He's so corrupted at that point, which I think it's supposed to
He's
be
entitled
that his
now, too.
time that he spent with the Chevalier, where they're criminals, basically. They're just swindling people. That corrupted him so completely that by the time he gets this incredible opportunity,
I'm going to swindle you too.
He's just too twisted to enjoy what he has. He is a good father. Another thing that they do to make him a character that's impossible to hate, everybody does contain multitudes. I like it so much that they just never let us sit comfortably with our judgment of him. And
But
every
he actually
time,
loves his own son.
Terrible stepfather, but a great father, really loves him, is kind, trying to teach him how to be like him. And do you notice every time there's violence in front of the kid reacts with this big grin.
Yeah.
He loves it. He's thrilled. There's the scene where he fights Lord Bullingdon in front of everybody. The thing that really ruins him is the beginning of his downfall.
Bullingdon does get in his stepfather's face. It's not entirely unmotivated by Barry, Redmond. Well, we'll just call him Barry Lyndon, I guess. Barry coming after him and attacking him is motivated. There's a reason why he does do something about it, but
during that brawl, the little kid has a big smile on his face.
Okay.
Like he is loving it. And it's not the only time we see that. And then what does him in? What ends up getting this poor kid killed is his eagerness to join the hunt. He just wants to join his dad and do this
you
act of
can't
violence.
ride this horse without me, but he rides the horse without him and then he dies.
And the reason he wants a horse instead of a pony is because he just can't wait. He's so impatient to join his father hunting. So there's these little seeds planted to make us believe that this kid would have grown up to be a real piece of work.
Yeah, he would have been entitled by his father as well. One thing we also see when Barry's messing around with the women, they look fine, but Marissa Berenson is far more hot than they are. And you could say that's the old adage of no matter how hot she is, some guy somewhere is tired of sleeping with her. But when we see these women, they're okay. Shouldn't you be sleeping with your wife? She's better looking than that.
Yeah,
but
again, there's no reason for him to treat her the way he
does what he
treats her
wants
from the
because he
jump.
can.
Yeah.
With his cousin Nora early in the movie, that seduction scene where she puts the scarf between her boobs and then she's right in his face. He wanted to marry his cousin. And if he had money, I guess he would have, and none of this would have happened. That's a good scene, too. Pretty impressive scene early on. So he saw that his father got killed in the duel. I guess that also is supposed to suggest this scarred him. He lost his dad. He wasn't a little kid, but he was young-ish anyway.
Helps explain why he keeps glomming onto all these father figures.
He's poor and he feels
throughout.
alone. Yes, he's poor and he feels alone. And he has her, but then not only does he lose that duel, supposedly for her honor, and then has to go on the run because he kills that guy Quinn, he finds out from Grogan that was all a scam.
And he doesn't actually kill him.
So Kubrick doesn't focus on it, but you could read into the fact that he would be thinking, so Nora, who I was in love with and who I thought was in love with me, I won the duel, but I had to run away, but she was part of that whole ruse. So she didn't really love me anyway, or at least not enough. None of that's played out. He never says that I recall in the story.
Did it all for nothing. All the indignity of it, losing his mother's, not fortune, but all the money they had, he loses.
On the road, yeah, the 20 guineas when he gets robbed on the road by those guys. And then he steals the stuff from the British Army guy. He goes by Fakenham, I think that's how you pronounce that. So fake, and then and ham is one whole word. And those two soldiers that are in the stream are gay soldiers.
He doesn't care.
Right.
He's just like, oh, this is good. I can take advantage of this. And the movie presents it. It's just there. It's in the background. It's
No, but I think it's important.
Realistic.
I think it's very important that they appear to be gay because I think that guy's supposed to be Fakenham. If he goes to a superior officer and says,
why he was...
my stuff is gone, my horse and all my clothes and everything, but why?
Why did you leave
I was
it
naked in a
unattended?
river with this my friend. So he can't admit that. I don't know what he told the guy, what he told the superior officer, but he can't admit why. And I guess that's why Barry gets away with it as long as he did, that he plays somebody else.
That is one of the moments where you as the audience member are invited to be like, get out of there. Yeah, run for your life. Sure, you're doing a bad thing by deserting the army. Oh, back to the verisimilitude. One of the best ways that is used in this movie is in that insane battle sequence. That first battle scene, which the narrator takes care to explain, was a battle so insignificant that it's not even mentioned in the accounts of the war.
The 7 Years' War, right?
Yeah, and it is brutal. The infantry just seems to be suicidally marching directly towards their deaths. They're taken down by the dozen by these musket shots that just keep relentlessly pummeling them, but the drum keeps beating and they keep marching straight into it. It's incredible to watch, and it's really where the pacing pays off because it has that relentless marching pace. Not like an action film that manipulates your perception of the events. No, where there in real time. We watch the bodies fall and you feel like you're there. You're really imagining what it would feel like to just keep marching into danger as your fellow soldiers keep falling around you. So then when he has the opportunity to desert, you're kind of like, get out of there. And then one of the first things he does is he meets that German
Frau Elischen.
Yeah, and they have this lovely brief affair, and it's so warm and lovely, this little respite in the film. When one of the true kind moments in the film where something nice happens to him and there's no bad consequences.
He actually likes her.
Yeah, and she's beautiful, and she really likes him, and they enjoy each other's company, and they just part ways, and it's like nothing happened. Part of, I guess, the episodicness of the film. You know
Yes,
which film
it is.
owes a huge debt to Barry Lyndon is another movie that I adore, which is 12 Years a Slave, for being like episodic, for having big characters show up and then go away and never be seen again. And the realistic way that life is that people enter your life and then they leave, and even if they had a huge impact on you, you still may never see them again.
It's the opposite of Crash.
Yeah.
We're not all tied together.
Yeah.
We're an Altman film. We're not all tied together.
The realism is more important than narrative convenience or elegance.
The Chevalier is in the very beginning of part 2, because it does say part 1 and part 2 during the movie. And we're going to cover another movie next week that has, a very short movie, in fact, that has something like 5 parts, and it's an hour and 10 minutes long. And when part 2 starts, we see the marriage, when he marries the lady, because he basically talked off Sir Lyndon, if you will, into killing him. Well, not killing himself, but dying. What did he say exactly that made this guy die, have a heart attack?
I think he just made him angry, and it's good timing.
Well, he sputtered and choked on my own rage here.
Yeah. It's certainly very convenient for him that he dies right then and there.
Because that's in 1773. We see the Chevalier at the marriage, and then he's just gone. I don't know if he's even mentioned again, let alone seen.
They were so close. They were this little dyad, and it's surprising that he doesn't use his new position to help the Chevalier out. And we never find out even what happens to him, even though he very much lifted Barry up. He was a total nobody. In fact, he was
a spy.
In trouble. Yeah, he's in trouble with the Prussian army, almost their prisoner, being forced to serve.
Potzdorff is when he figured out that he's an impersonator, an imposter, I should say. And he and his uncle, Potzdorff's uncle, sick him on Chevalier, who they think is an Irish spy because they got an Irish
which he is.
turncoat, and they're right about that for sure. But Barry's playing a Hungarian manservant. Potzdorff is another person that just goes from the story, I think, right? He doesn't die or anything. We just don't see him.
We just never see him again.
After a time, yeah.
And another example in there of Redmond doing something truly honorable and brave because he saves Potzdorff. He could let Potzdorff die. They're in the building. The pillar collapses on him.
That's right, yeah.
Watching the movie, I was like, well, he's going to get out of here now. Now's his chance. He's got to escape from this guy who's been holding him hostage in this army. But instead, he saves his life, and that's what gets him the appointment as a spy as the war's coming to an end. And they put him to work, which he could use the work. But there's this lovely bit in the voiceover when he meets the Chevalier for the first time, and this great omnipotent narrator tells us two things. He sees the way the Chevalier lived, and he is determined right then and there that he must always live as a gentleman. I can't be poor anymore. You see the Chevalier, and he's wearing this terrible makeup. He looks ridiculous. He looks like a clown. We don't see him and see somebody respectable, but Barry does. And he says, well, this is how I gotta live my life. Whatever I do, I cannot go back to being poor and going back to the army or whatever. He tells a beautiful story about how if you've never been an expat, you will never understand what it's like to be united with somebody who speaks your language and remembers the country that you're from, and how lonely it can be to be in a strange land. And that's just such a beautiful, vulnerable position to see him in. It's such a human experience. You go from thinking, oh, this guy, he's this social climber, all he cares about is money, to suddenly feeling this really relatable, beautiful vulnerability with him.
And what do you think about him taking her name? So unusual. Sometimes you see it in real life where the husband will take the wife's name, or in the case of, and we said this during Kick-Ass a few months ago, that Aaron Taylor Johnson was just Aaron Taylor, and then he married Sam. Wait, no, she's Sam Taylor, right? He was Aaron Johnson, and Sam Taylor, the director, he took her name. So they're both Taylor Johnson now. Even that's unusual, let alone if he'd actually just went by Aaron Taylor, which he didn't do, granted, but he took her name. But Barry takes Sir Lyndon's, well, Lady Lyndon's last name to become Barry Lyndon.
That's her first husband's name. It's not even her name. It's the name of a prominent house. He wants to be associated with their aristocracy.
But it's later on that he needs to get a title, which he doesn't have. So he's got her name, and he's got money, and he's got this beautiful wife, and they have a son that he loves. But he needs a title because, as his mother points out, if the lady dies for some reason, Lady Lyndon dies, then Bullingdon, who's still a kid, or at least a very young man, will get everything. So her son needs a title, And that's why he ingratiates himself with other people and bribes people to try to get that title.
Spends her fortune.
Until the fight he has in front of everybody during a concert, is it? Well, yes, the mother is playing a concert, playing the piano for everybody.
A recital, the harpsichord.
Her son walks in, her older son, Bullingdon, walks in and challenges Barry effectively, gets in his face, tells him he's an opportunist, and I don't know if he
But
says
he doesn't challenge him to a fight. He's just calling him out in public, and then Barry loses his temper and beats the daylights out of him in front of everybody there.
All the work he did
in that moment,
is gone
in that
because...
moment of weakness where he gets violent, which has worked for him a lot.
When it's called for to get in a fist fight, when it's called for to get into a duel, and when it's called for to get into a sword play...
Or to fight in a battle.
All those things, when it's okay, then you're lauded for it. But you don't do it at a concert when you're mad at your stepson. And they show the one time where the guy is relatively polite to him, but it's basically saying, get out of my face at dinner. And the voiceover talks about how that was the end of it for him.
So every interaction in this film, with a few striking exceptions just like that scene, are full of this stifling formality and propriety. Even that roadside robbery is committed with the utmost politeness, right?
True, yeah.
And yet this strict conduct doesn't protect anyone from violence. In fact, it is an incredibly violent film, and the formality just seems to serve as like a rationalization for the violence. It just gives them permission to do whatever they want. It dresses it up in civility, but that civility doesn't protect anyone from a bullet. But he only gets punished when he commits the violence without all the dressing that goes with the violence. It's the propriety. He's impolite,
you know what the best comparison is? That a boxer is told, go in the ring and be an animal.
Yes,
beat the living tar out of that guy. But as soon as the match is over and hear the bell, don't ever do that in public. Mm-hmm. Which, yes, Mike Tyson and all these people should have been able to control themselves better in public or with their wives or whatever they've done. But you're asking them to be animals for a matter of maybe half hour, maybe even a matter of minutes, but then turn it off and never do that in reality. Or other sports, too, like football that's violent. You get paid big time for that, and we love you for it. But if you do it in public, in a place that we didn't say you should, then you're the worst thing that's ever existed. And they can't necessarily contain the rage that makes them good at their job, which I guess is maybe what's happening here with Barry. Most guys in his position, if he was insulted by his stepson, wouldn't react in public like that, especially in these stodgy times. But he does because he is the Mike Tyson of his day.
Yeah. That battle scene reminded me of the Paths of Glory scene where they're all climbing out of the trench and they're asked to accept this violence because I said so. You might say that about Clockwork Orange. That has a very interesting relationship with violence. This is a theme that he likes to explore. And when you're talking about him taking her name, another theme is the theme of disguises. Another reason he may have taken her name is because he doesn't seem to be all that attached to his identity.
No, of course not.
He leaves his family at the beginning of the film. He disguises himself as a lieutenant to desert the army. He disguises himself to become the manservant of Chevalier. He disguises himself as a Chevalier to escape Prussia, and then changes his name and assumes this totally other identity where he does not seem very interested in people knowing where he's from.
And also becomes a drunk, just like Jack does. The next project Kubrick had was The Shining. And Jack's character in that movie is such an alcoholic. Well, that's what Barry becomes in this. He isn't a violent alcoholic the same way that Jack is, but they both are big drinkers.
So what do you think would have become of Redmond had he been born into happier circumstances? If his father had not died, if he got to marry his cousin, if she had chosen him over Captain Quinn, do you think he would have been a better man, a kinder man, a happier man?
I think he's enough of a banal person in regular life that he would have probably been okay. But when he gets pushed... Some movies are about people that would have been either good or bad, no matter the circumstances. They were going to be that way anyway. This guy, I think, is somebody, the movie's saying, I feel like anyway, yeah, my father got killed in a duel when I was pretty young, and then I'm in love with my cousin, and I'm not allowed to be with her, and then I find out she screwed me over when it came to just wanting money. I think it changed him. Mm-hmm. And made him feel like...
that you describe him as banal, because that is a pretty fun...
He's an unextraordinary person.
He's so unextraordinary.
Which is also true about Jack in The Shining, and it's... Well, maybe not so much true about Alex in Clockwork Orange. I guess he's extraordinary in some ways. The astronauts in 2001 are extraordinary because they're astronauts, but as astronauts are very boring people.
They have no personalities, yeah.
And that's true in many ways about Bill in Eyes Wide Shut. He's a doctor, but he's not an extraordinary person. He's not super rich like the people he's dealing with through most of that movie. And look at the guys in Full Metal Jacket. They're all regular grunts. Mm-hmm. Matthew Modine, it's a good performance, but this guy's not some extraordinary person either. Mm-hmm. I think Kubrick liked to show ordinary people doing ordinary things and finding a way to make them interesting.
We see the last scene, her signing the checks, and then the title card says something to the effect of, that's how he spent his days as a gambler, never very successful again, and now they're all dead and they are equals.
That's one of the smartest things that I remember George R.R. Martin said about Game of Thrones. Somebody said to him before the series was going to end, probably in 2017 or so, he said, a graveyard with leaves blowing through and all the characters are on the graves, meaning we're all going to die. No matter what you want to do, Lannisters and Starks and all the rest of you. That line in Dead Poet Society that Robin Williams has early on to his students. We're all food for worms. Same with all these people.
That's that
things matter.
Nihilism that
but
just
we're all
feeds
gonna
my
die.
black heart.
It's what you do when you're alive, because we all are going to die at some point. Tell the people in power right now who feel like they can live forever. Maybe they think they can, but they can't. Ones who have power and money, you're no better off than me or you or the lowliest person on this planet right now when it comes to your mortality, because it's going to happen at some point. A pretty important character, though, too, is it Reverend Runt? Murray Melvin has a very big role in this movie. He's in the movie a lot. We see him when we first meet all the Lyndons, and he's with the lady quite a bit of the time. And then because she is desperate after her son dies, the young son dies, Brian, I think I said that a few times during the movie, didn't I? That she turns to religion and him. But then it's Barry's mother, Redmond's mother, that fires him.
And it's firing him that leads her to try to take her own life. When she tries to take her own life, that leads Lord Bullingdon to finally just have enough. That is what puts him over the edge so that he finally challenges him in that duel.
And Graham, the Philip Stone character, who is Grady in The Shining, and he's Alex's father in Clockwork Orange, they go to appeal to Bullingdon. Part of the reason why Bullingdon does all this is that they say, you got to do something about this. I think Graham still has a job with them, but Runt doesn't, so he's a bitter ex-employee in some ways.
You know, this man has nothing else in his life. He has nowhere else to go. He lives this life of extraordinary privilege. He has a lot of influence over Lady Lyndon, but I also feel like he just likes her. He cares about the family. He cares about the boys.
He's been with them a long time.
Yeah, this is his home. This is his family. And to just be so unceremoniously fired, and fired because this man's pissing away their fortune, too. The injustice of it is terrible, but also probably fired because they feel that he's too influential and they could care less what happens to Lady Lyndon. Although if she had successfully died, they would have been in really big trouble right then and there.
Because Bullingdon would have bullied him out of the family entirely with none of that 500 guineas a year like he does get towards the end of the story. And Redmond's mother is justly worried about that because that's what would have happened. Even before, I think, the whipping. There's also that scene when the two brothers are trying to do their homework and the younger brother, Brian, is getting in Lord Bullingdon's face. And I like the way the Lord mostly plays it. Bullingdon, whatever. I hate calling him a Lord. He's not really a jerk big brother at that point. He says many times very politely, I'm trying to do my work. Would you stop it?
He's got a bratty little
and
brother,
the kid
right?
won't stop. He says it multiple times, and finally he loses his temper. But he's blamed for it when, I think it's Barry comes in the room and sees this. Well, got to be Brian who's not guilty of anything. But he was guilty. He was the little snot that was causing a little trouble.
And then he humiliates his almost grown stepson by whipping him, spanking him, really hurting him. And the performance, you can tell he's really hurting him.
Yeah, Leon Vitali is vital in this movie.
Oh, he was so good.
He was the voice, and I guess maybe the body, but especially the voice of Red Cloak in Eyes Wide Shut, which we covered last year.
He didn't do much acting, though.
No, he was Kubrick's assistant starting maybe on this movie. For the rest of them, he was a big part of The Shining and Full Metal Jacket behind the scenes, and then I think also did behind-the-scenes stuff on Eyes Wide Shut, but then did play that character in the orgy scene in the movie. But he's a vital character in this. And I think he's actually quite good. I think he's one of the best things in the whole movie.
I think he's wonderful. Oh, the push and pull of your sympathies between the two men at the end. He is the one that you should root for.
He's wrong.
He's wronged. We talked about it a little at the beginning, but let's come back to the duel scene. That is the climactic scene in the movie. I've never lost interest. I was never bored, but it's almost excruciating how long they're making you wait. And speaking of the formality, they have all these rules, and the rules are different for every duel, too, which I found very interesting, that every time he has one of these duels, they each kind of have their own rules and personalities. And in this one, they take turns shooting. Of course, gambling, a huge theme in this movie. The first thing we ever see Barry doing is playing a game of cards with his cousin. They're constantly gambling. Everything is up to a coin toss, right, in this man's life, although he cheats a lot. But in that coin toss, that whole thing could have played out differently if it had just come up tails, but it comes up heads. And Bullingdon gets the first shot, which screws it up. And then there is this moment that will make everybody second guess what they ever thought about Barry Lyndon in this whole movie. For once. He has so much honor because we know he is a good shot. We know all of his problems would be solved if Lord Bullingdon was dead. They are not that far apart, and Bullingdon thinks he's done for. This guy's got me dead to rights. This is over.
And he picked the fight, and this is what happens in a duel. If he died, in their world, this is entirely honorable from Barry's point of view.
Yeah, that misfire, that solves all of his problems. So what does he do? He shoots into the ground. First of all, it is 100% the honorable thing to do. He's not an honorable man, but he does this very honorable thing. I think he's suicidal. He is a drunk. He hates his life. He's broke. He is grieving so much about his son. From the moment his son dies, there is nothing there. I think he wants to die. I think he wants to fail. I think he just hates himself enough. This is not a man that has an identity and self-confidence. You wouldn't say he's a typical villain, that he's just a narcissist who's selfish. There is something really deeply broken about him, and the only thing he ever loved was Brian. Why? And then Brian dies. It's kind of his fault. And there's probably part of him that, whether he's aware of it or not, he's trying to kill himself with alcohol anyway. So maybe this is an easy way out. Maybe he wouldn't mind. There could have been a part of him that's like, if I shoot into the ground, he will say, we've both been honorable. I take it back. We don't actually have to have this duel.
Right, because Bullingdon has the option of not continuing, but he wants
to.
They
ask. One of the guys is like, do you want to continue?
Because they could stop,
But he has to continue because he's backed into a corner, too.
And he shoots Barry in the left leg, which gets amputated, which is all they could really do back then to save it, which leads to the payoff that Barry probably doesn't really want, but he'll take the money if he's going to live. He probably would have rather, as you say, just died. I love when he's shown in the hospital bed, and I think the leg's already gone.
Yes.
They did that the way they do it even now. Forrest Gump did this, where you have the actor's legs through a hole in the bed, and then you make it look like they don't have any legs. Barry, Ryan O'Neal, moves a little bit, and I thought, that is even more convincing. He sits up just a little bit in bed. If you don't move, the effect is easy to do, or easier to do, but the fact he moves a little bit, I was very impressed by that. But if you're right that he wanted to die, now he gets to live on with quite a bit of money every year to gamble and screw around.
When he lost everything.
But he didn't want it, I guess.
When he lost their life savings, it was 20 guineas, and now he gets 500 guineas a year. A fortune. That's a kind of fortune that probably could have gotten him married to his cousin he was so in love with. Yeah. But now it's a pittance, because I think they said at some point she has something like 5,000 a year is her. Maybe it was even more than that, I can't remember. But to him, it's this big disappointment. Although I think the humiliation and being banished, being sent back to Ireland and not getting to live as a gentleman anymore is probably the biggest punishment for him.
And being maimed back then would have been a big deal.
Yes, yeah.
No one wants to be maimed even now, but back then it would have been so much harder to live that way. The way medicine was especially. And
the stigma attached. He's ashamed. He deserves it.
They would have said, and in movie language you might even say this about a character now, you're not a man anymore if you have a body part missing, especially a leg. All right, so the cast, I'll talk about maybe a dozen people here. Ryan O'Neal, who was big in the 70s. We just covered Love Story back in February, and we're going to cover What's Up, Doc in 2 weeks. So it's a Ryan O'Neal year. That's 3 movies in less than half a year. But that'll probably be it for him, maybe forever. Marissa Berenson, who was in Cabaret as Natalia. I don't remember who that was exactly, but she was in that movie before this then, the Best Picture. No, it didn't win Best Picture, but it won a lot of Oscars. That was the Godfather year. And she's also in Color Me Kubrick, which obviously is about Stanley Kubrick. I think John Malkovich plays either Kubrick or a character in that. She's still acting a lot, and she's 78 years old. But I thought at this time, in the mid-70s, she reminded me at least a lot of Angelina Jolie.
She's so
If they're going to remake this movie, but I mean, she looks like her, though. If you're going to remake this movie, she should play that character. But then Jolie might think, I don't want to do a character where I barely get to speak or do anything. Because it is a fairly deliberately dull role with almost no dialogue. We mentioned Vitali's credits already. Murray Melvin, who does play the Reverend. He was in Alfie, the 1966 one, Michael Caine movie. And then the 2004 Phantom of the Opera. Patrick Magee, who was he again? He is the Chevalier, I believe. Yes, he is the Chevalier du Barry. Was in A Clockwork Orange. Of course, he's the dude who has his wife get killed by those guys, the Sing in the Rain sequence. And also was in Chariots of Fire, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies quite a few years ago, Best Picture winner. He died of a heart attack, though, the year after that came out, 1982. Hardy Kruger, who's Pottsdorf, was in A Bridge Too Far a couple years after this. Marie Keane plays Barry's mom, who's such a devious character in the end, not in the early part of the film. Had been in Ryan's Daughter, and also The Dead for John Huston in the 80s. That's a pretty good movie. If you've never seen it, you should watch that. Also Irish. So a bit of a tie to this.
Save it for next March.
Maybe so, yeah. Gay Hamilton, who's only in the movie early on as Nora, had a small role in A Man for All Seasons, which we covered years ago, Best Picture winner. Leonard Rossiter, who's Quinn, plays a Russian doctor in 2001. So when, what's his name? Floyd, I think, is on the space station before he goes to the moon. He's one of the doctors he's talking to. He's a Russian guy. I think that's it. He was also in Oliver the same year as 2001, so he's the Best Picture winner.
I gotta say, of all the side characters that come and go in this movie, Captain Quinn, my favorite by a country mile.
Really?
Every minute he's on screen, I just love him. His pompous, everything perfect. Oh, he's delicious.
And then they had that ruse to get rid of Redmond at the time by pretending that he was killed in the duel. He wasn't killed at all. I guess he had, what do they call it, toe toe was shot at him.
What is that?
I think it's a blank.
I guess.
Same idea anyway. Godfrey Quigley is Grogan, who is another guy who was in the movie in the first half quite a bit, but then not again. He's the chaplain in A Clockwork Orange, so when Alex is in prison. And he was also in Get Carter the same year as A Clockwork Orange. Stephen Berkoff, who was Maitland in Beverly Hills Cop, so the bad guy in that, and he's also in Clockwork Orange. He's, I believe, one of the cops that maybe even spits on Alex in that scene when he first gets caught by the cops after he kills the woman. He's the dude who gets swindled by them.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I didn't recognize
and then they
him
have the sword duel.
So I Googled Stephen Berkoff, Barry Lyndon, and then you see his face in that makeup and think, okay, now I can see his face. I couldn't recognize him until I saw that. Because, of course, for one thing, it's around 10 years before Beverly Hills Cop. He's 87 and still acting, though. Philip Stone, I mentioned, was the dad in A Clockwork Orange and Grady in The Shining, and he is Graham. I was going to write, I had written in my notes, but took it out. He didn't speak, because the first few times we see him, he does not say a word, but he does have some lines in the last maybe half hour of the movie.
I was going to say, Kubrick just didn't want to pay him the union dues. Or the union wages, to say.
And then he becomes pretty important, along with the Reverend, when they convince Lord Bullingdon to go get his. And we talked about the narrator, Michael Hordern. He was Marley in the 1951 A Christmas Carol. He so often is giving away what's going to happen. It isn't just a matter of saying, well, here's the scene, and then you see the scene. It's more, here's what happened in the scene, and then you see the scene. Mm-hmm. But he does a good job of narrating this. So Kubrick, the writer, the director, the producer, probably the editor and the cinematographer in a way too, but not officially. This is movie number 11. The 4 that were on the AFI's Top 100 list were Spartacus, Dr. Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and A Clockwork Orange. But we've also covered The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, Eyes Wide Shut, and The Killing, Paths of Glory. The only ones we haven't done are Fear and Desire, Killer's Kiss, and Lolita. Movies 166 to 1, so it filled our screen. They made it a 185, I think so. Maybe there were some black bars, tiny black bars, I forget now. But we did watch it on Stars after starting it on Turner Classic Movies. John Alcott also shot A Clockwork Orange and The Shining, and he died of a heart attack at only 55 in 1986. The editor, Tony Lawson, this was his only movie with Kubrick, but also cut Straw Dogs back in 1971, another 1971 reference, Clockwork Orange, French Connection, and he cut many movies for Neil Jordan many years later. The music adapter is what it says in the opening credits, but he did win the music score Oscar, although the music score Oscar over the years has had so many words in it. Best music score adaptation or blah, 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 whatever. Leonard Rosenman, he had done music for Rebel Without a Cause back in the 50s, did a couple of the Planet of the Apes sequels, was nominated also for Star Trek IV, the one with the whales, and he won an Oscar the year after this, so he won 2 in a row for Bound for Glory. We didn't talk about what happens next. Well, the way that the Lord was looking at his mother, I think maybe Bullingdon makes a move on her, and she seems so broken that she may not care enough to refuse him. What do you think? Am I making
we already know what happens next. They all eventually become equals.
Well, true. That's not next, but that is eventually. Right then, last thoughts on a movie that you obviously loved. I didn't like it as much as you, but I did like it. Barry Lyndon.
Well, this is just my first step into experiencing this work of art. And I hope to our listeners this slightly redeems me for not really liking 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Being impressed by it, I'm sure.
Impressed.
But not liking it.
Respect that movie. May never watch it again, though.
So if you're a 4-star review on this, which it sounds like you are, and I'm a 3-star review on this, I asked this question. I wonder if Tarantino would quote what he had Christian Slater say in True Romance, because he wrote the screenplay for that, even though Tony Scott directed it. When Christian Slater says at one point in the film, most of Hollywood movies are unwatchable movies made from unreadable books. Would he say that? I wonder if that's what Tarantino... And I thought I was going to say something like that, actually. I wrote that down thinking I was going to feel that way.
You didn't think you were going to like the movie?
I saw it before a long time ago. I wasn't that impressed by it. Maybe I saw it on videotape then. It probably looked awful on videotape, or didn't look great anyway, because what really did. But I have to admit, I figured I was going to lean that way, and then I ended up being more of a fan. Not a huge fan like you, but more of a fan. For a 3-hour epic, this isn't exactly hastily paced, but it isn't dull either. O'Neill is better in this than he was in Love Story. We saw more of his talents here. What a great decade for him. Marissa Berenson looks appropriately sad and haunted. I doubt I'll watch this again for a long time, but I can't say I regret investing the time in it this time.
Of course, not everything is for everybody. But there is a certain amount of guts it takes to make a movie that you know a lot of people will just hate on sight. But for some of us, it's just exactly what we want. And there's lots of movies that I hate on sight that lots of other people love. They're just not for me. I'd rather see artists be brave and take a chance and not be afraid of turning people off than try to please everybody.
And also take studio money and not waste it, but
Well,
spend
that's
a
why I
lot of it.
say Kubrick's gift by the end is that he could write his own ticket, and he really took advantage of that very rare status.
And then he goes and makes a more commercial movie next with The Shining, and even Full Metal Jacket was more commercial. And it may not have been the most commercial idea, but then you get huge stars and Eyes Wide Shut. So maybe he learned some lessons from this movie, not really truly succeeding. Nicholson's a big star. Full Metal Jacket doesn't have any stars, but it is a pretty approachable topic. I think maybe the most rewatchable movie he ever made might be Full Metal Jacket. Rewatchable, not my favorite, not the best. But The Shining is really long, and I don't watch it all that often. 2001 is brilliant, but I don't really watch it much at all. Strangelove is a lot of fun, but it does need to get to about a third of the way in before you truly get to enjoy yourself the same way.
Yeah, that's fair. You know how I feel. The Shining is my favorite
True.
movie, so I think what you just said is ridiculous. Of course, The Shining is the most rewatchable movie from the first frame.
We gotta watch it again. It's been a while since I've seen that, actually. So that was how we saw Barry Lyndon. We'll be back in 7 days with a review of one of the oldest films we've ever tackled. We just watched it about 2 hours ago. Battleship Potemkin. In fact, in the over 660 reviews on this channel, so 664 it will be next week, we've covered only 7 movies that are older than Battleship Potemkin. Most of them are Buster Keaton films, by the way, and then Griffith as well. So the coming attractions trivia question for Battleship Potemkin. The Odessa Steps sequence is one of the most famous in film history, or Odessa Staircase, as it says in the title card on that before that sequence. Odessa is a port city on which body of water? So in Ukraine.
So, for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Battleship Potemkin. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to favorite or subscribe. We've made hundreds of episodes, and they're all available for you to check out. And if you like us and you'd like to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is by leaving us a rating and a review. Another way to support us and a great small Canadian business that we seriously use and love is by going to sparkplug.coffee/HYES for freshly roasted premium coffee. And that HYES will get you started with a 20% discount. You can also find us on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And we love to hear from you guys. There's a few ways to find us, starting with Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis. Ryan is at MovieFiend51. We're also on Blue Sky. You can find me as Bev Ellis Ellis and Ryan as Ryan-Ellis. And our email address is haveyouveriSeenPodcast@gmail.com.
We need to bring back the duel. Just stand there politely and wait for someone to shoot you.
Yeah.
Your turn. Maybe I'm going to die, but oh, tut, go ahead.
I can't think of any other way to settle our disputes, so here we are.
Top of the morning. Please kill me quickly if you're going to kill me at all.
And cut.